just like Dad, he said. We're in the book of Joshua. Last week, and we'll just pick right up with if I can get there. Of course, they are getting ready to go into the promised land here, and they're going to send out spies again. Don't get confused. Sometimes we get a little bit mixed up with the spies. The first time they sent 12 spies. Of course, 10 were unfaithful, 2 were faithful, Caleb and Joshua. But now this time, Joshua is sending out the spies, Moses, and instead of 12, he's going to send out 2. Chapter 2 is basically dealing with preparations to enter into the promised land, to take Jericho. That'll be the first city they take, of course. It's also, we could call it reconnaissance. They're going to do some reconnaissance on the city, so he sends out those spies. But again, don't get confused. This time just 2 spies are sent out. They come to Rahab's house. So Joshua tells them to go view the land. They come to a harlot's house named Rahab, and they lodge there. It's interesting, she's in Christ's genealogy. As you'll see as we go through this chapter, she's going to be spared because she has faith in the one true God of heaven. She's going to ask for mercy, and they're going to give instructions for that. The question comes up sometimes, well, why did they lodge at a harlot's house? And the answer to this is we're not sure. There are a couple of possibilities. It's, bear in mind, this is one of those situations. The Bible doesn't say yay or nay as far as condoning or condemning this. It's just recorded. So for someone to come to the Bible and say, well, here's a contradiction because these men, they're supposed to be such righteous men, and they go to a harlot's house. The Bible just records it. The Bible doesn't say, hey, great job, guys. It's recording it. And there are times when the Bible records things that we know from other scriptures, putting parallel passages together, that it's not approved. It's just recorded. Abraham lied on one occasion. The Bible records it, but the Bible doesn't say, good job, Abraham, for telling that lie. God could have and would have taken care of Abraham without him lying for God to do so. He didn't have to lie. God had him taken care of. But Abraham, in a moment of faltering faith, he did lie. So these men, it may be that they they certainly were humans, and humans make mistakes. So it may have been that they were up to no good, and that's why they went to a harlot's house. We also on the wall. That's a common place. Like an innkeeper. It may have been that she was in the business of harlotry, but also innkeeping. We just don't know, and so we could speculate for all kinds of ideas. The Bible doesn't reveal, and so before we are too quick to condemn these men, and especially to try to condemn the Bible, we need to understand it's recorded. That's all it tells us, is that they went to her house. We know later on we'll find out she's in the genealogy of Christ. Of course, we find out why as we go through this chapter, because she's going to end up marrying an Israelite after she's spared. But again, it might be that they were up to no good, or it may be that she just, it could have been that she said, here's a place to stay. It may have been that she offered them other services and they turned her down. We just don't know. Verses 4 and 5, Rahab is going to lie to defend them or to protect them. It's told the king of Jericho in verse 2, there are spies here searching out the city, searching out the country. And so the king sends people to Rahab. Apparently this was a pretty common place where people first came into the city. Again, that's not any indication necessarily of what she's doing. That just may mean that, again, that may lend credence to her being some kind of an innkeeper. She's kind of the first place, and she'll offer people lodging. Just don't know. So the king sends Rahab, asks, verses 4 and 5, she's going to lie and say, she takes them and hides them. says, well, men came, verse 4, at the end of the verse there. They came, but I don't know where they are. And then about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither they went, I wot or I know not. So she says, hey, run quick and you might be able to overtake them. What about this? This is another one when people struggle. Rahab told a lie. And she's praised by God. She's in the genealogy of Christ. What's the answer here? In fact, just notice something. And if I can, let me get a volunteer for Hebrews. Let me get there and make sure I got the right reference. Sometimes I have typos, especially in my preaching school notes. I don't know if those were just sleepy days or daydreaming. Looking over a reference and I go, what? That's it. Hebrews 11:31. Who's got it? Go ahead, Brother Allen.
By faith the heart of Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, and she received the spies with peace.
All right, so say, well, there are certain situations where if it's to protect someone innocent or protect yourself, if it's life or death situation, what's the big deal? So what? Anybody have a thought on that? Exactly. That's the long and short of it. You have to remember, the Bible does not say by lying Rahab was blessed and she saved these spies because she did such a fine thing in telling that lie, and she sent those spies away or those other men away. It says by faith. She's praised for her faith, not for her lying. This is again a case where it's recorded, but it's not condoned. She's praised for her faith. Her faith led her to take action. And of course, in Hebrews 11, that's what it's talking about. And she didn't take action that was approved by God because she told a lie. Do you think God would have protected those spies had she not lied? Of course. I mean, they were doing his work. They were on a mission from God. He would have taken care of them. She didn't have to lie. God didn't need her help. But was she human? Sure. And so just remember when you think about this, she's praised for her faith. And there's not a person among us that can say, you know what, I have faith and I've never made a mistake. I've never sinned, even as a child of God. Well, there might have been those times before I became a Christian, but ever since becoming a Christian, just sinless all the way out. There's not a person that can say that. Not a soul. So here's Rahab. Understand she's a person. And yes, she made mistakes. And one of them was that she lied. Her faith was developing, by the way. She had some faith, but a little bit more faith than she would have understood. God's got this. I don't have to lie to protect these spies. But be that as it may, it's recorded. It's not condoned, and sometimes you'll see that in Scripture where things are recorded. And when somebody brings something like that up and says, hey, this seems to be a contradiction or I'm confused or whatever, you just remind them that sometimes something is recorded, but it's not condoned. So it goes on, verse 6. She'd brought them up to the roof of the house, of course, typically flat. A lot of times the houses back then had flat roofs, so she takes them up on the roof of the house, hides them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. They would, many times in harvest time, March or April or so, they would take harvest material that was wet and they'd lay it out to dry. So that's pretty common. It was an easy spot to hide those spies. We'll also learn later when they cross the Jordan, it's overflowing the banks because it overflows its banks in harvest. So this kind of gives us an idea when all this is taking place. Then you come down to the men pursue. Of course, they don't find them. She tells them when she comes up to the roof, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that your terror has fallen upon us, that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Again, it's very interesting here because when the 12 spies go out, you have 10 of them, that all they can see is fear. We're afraid of them, and they cause an entire nation to become afraid. But yet, here, how different it is. She's saying, everybody's afraid of you because they know, they've heard about your God. And of course, he's going to show he is the one true God. She says, we've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, what you did to the two kings of the Amorites. By the way, the background for that is in Numbers 21, Sihon and Og. But the people of Jericho, they've heard about Israel. They know what's going on. Yes, sir.
When they entered the Jericho there, 40 years had transpired since a lot of this stuff had taken place, right, when they first. So the stories are still being told about this God that was able to do these things, and it seems to appear that all of them.
Yeah, I mean, the word had definitely gotten around. And that's a good point. 40 years later, people are still talking about crossing the Red Sea. Of course, here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about it. That's the impact of the one true God of heaven. And they've heard about Israel. They know about Sihon and Og. Again, that's Numbers 21. But that's Numbers 21 is right there at the end of the wilderness wanderings. If you recall, it's actually been, sometimes time gets away. I was thinking it hadn't been that long ago, but it's been probably 2 or 3 years. A sermon from Numbers 21 about the vipers that were biting the people, and Moses and the brazen serpent. But we talked about that, and the generation has died out at that point. You have Moses left, and that's it. And of course, Moses eventually will go up to the mount. He'll die, and God will bury him himself. He's not allowed to go into the promised land, but they're right at the end of that 40 years' time, and they kill these kings, this judgment from God on these idolatrous kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of Jordan. Sometimes the Bible will use the term Trans-Jordan, and sometimes it'll say the other side of Jordan. And when it does that, if you're looking at a map, east of the Jordan is Trans-Jordan, or the other side of Jordan. The promised land proper is basically west of the Jordan, or left, if you're looking at the map. So it's going to be from the Jordan and over to it's not the Red Sea, it's Mediterranean. I just went blank there on my Bible geography. So Trans-Jordan, Sihon, Og, and you have Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh that say this is good territory, and all this is happening in Numbers 21 through about 23 or so, or 32, something like that, last part of Numbers. And the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they want to stay here, and Moses says, okay, as long as you go and help your brethren fight the wars for Canaan land proper. And of course, they agree to do that, and they do end up doing that, as we'll see in this book. So Rahab asked the men, having recognized, and verse 11, she says, the people's hearts melted as soon as they'd heard these things. There's no more courage in any man because of you, for the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Here's what she's praised for. She recognizes God is the God. Jehovah is the God. There is no other. These idols of the heathen, they're nothing, and she realizes that. No, they can't pray to their gods in Jericho or call upon their gods to save them, because this is the true God, and these are his people. That's what she's praised for. Now, she made mistakes just like we all do, but that's the faith she's praised for. Now, therefore, she says, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I've showed you kindness, you will show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token that you'll save alive my father, mother, brethren, sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. So she asked for them to save her when they take Jericho. So then they're going to give her a condition. And of course, they say, our life for yours, if you don't say anything about this, verse 14. And then when the Lord has given us land, we're going to deal kindly and truly with you. So she let them down. She let them down by a cord through the window, for her house was on the town wall. Again, I mentioned that earlier. And she lived upon the wall. So she says, go to the mountain lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there for 3 days till they come back, and then you can go your way. So they say, we will be blameless as long as you keep up your end of the bargain is the idea here. And then they say, bind this line or scarlet thread in the window, which you let us down by, verse 18. And you bring your father, your mother, your brethren, all your father's household home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thy house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if thou utter this, our business, then we will be quit or free from thine oath which thou hast made us to swear. So she says, okay. And she binds the scarlet cord in the window. So they go to the mountain. They stay there 3 days. The pursuers return, and they seek them. Of course, they don't find them. They return, and they come back to Joshua. But getting back to verses 16 through 19, they give conditions for saving Rahab. It's interesting. Here's an example in verses 16 through 19 of being, as one fellow put it in, I think it was Brother Bland in our class at Memphis, it's a good example of being in the right God-appointed place at the right God-appointed time. And so when God appoints a time and he says there's a place to be in for safety at that time, you better believe, I want to be in that spot. I want to be in that place. And so when they said to Rahab, when Jericho is destroyed, there's going to be one place of safety, and it's within the confines of the house that has the red scarlet cord. You know where I want to be when those soldiers come to take Jericho? I want to be in that house. And so when God says the Lord is coming again, we don't know when, but he's coming again, and when he comes again, there's one safe place to be, and that is in the house covered by the blood of Jesus. You know where I want to be when the Lord comes again? Where I fully intend to be? In the Lord's house, in his church that he purchased with his own blood. So there's a picture there of the church. And again, they tell her, she says anything, they're free from their oath. You see God's providence in verse 22. They came to the mountain, wait for the pursuers. They seek them throughout all the way, but they don't find them. No doubt that's God's providence looking after them. And then look at verse 24. They said unto Joshua, truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. Again, what a contrast. Before it's we're afraid of them, now it's they're afraid of us. Chapter 3, they're going to cross the Jordan. This is really chapter 3 and chapter 4. They're going to do this in a very orderly fashion. Joshua rose early in the morning. He's got important business to take care of, so he gets up, and it's time. I mean, they've been waiting for this for how many years? They've been in captivity for a long time. Joshua would have been. We don't really have an age. I'm trying to think. I don't recall ever mentioning an age for Joshua, but maybe around 20 years of age or so when they first went to spy out the land. Then, of course, it's set back for 40 years. They've been waiting for a long time, so it's time to cross the Jordan. Joshua, he is up early. He's ready to go. And they're going to do this in a very orderly fashion. You see this in verse 3. Of course, God wants things done decently and in order. 1 Corinthians 14:40. The ark of the Lord, ark of the covenant of the Lord, the priest, the Levites will bear it. He says, then you'll remove from your place and go after it. There's going to be a space between you and the ark, 2,000 cubits. Cubit is, somewhere around 18 inches, give or take. So somewhere around 3,000 feet there between them and the ark. Come not near unto it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way heretofore. He tells them to don't come too close to the ark, or you will die. Of course, that's an example of keeping the profane, the common, from the holy, that which is set apart and special for the service of God. In fact, we're going to learn as we go along, of course, you probably recall, the whole entire city of Jericho is holy in the sense of being consecrated to God. All the spoils are not to be taken. The city is to be burned with fire because it's consecrated. It's the first fruits. So he says, don't come too close to the ark lest you die. Following the ark, of course, signified following God. That ark of the covenant represented God's presence among his people, and will for many years to come. In fact, it's going to get so much so that they become very like superstitious about it. You'll see this in Samuel, 1 Samuel. They're going to go out to battle against the Philistines and get whooped, and they're going to just get massacred by the Philistines. And they say, "Oh, run get the ark. That's why we got beat. Go get the ark. Bring the ark of the covenant. Now we'll win a victory." And when they bring the ark down there, what happens? It gets taken. They not only got massacred again, the ark got taken. The problem wasn't that the ark wasn't there. The problem was that God wasn't there. And God wasn't there because they were disobedient. They needed to get their lives right with the Lord. So anyway, and even on down to Jeremiah's time, they're going to cry, the ark will be stored in the temple, Solomon's temple, and they just, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Nothing can happen to us. God dwells here, as if that was God's literal physical house. But it was to be representative of God. There's nothing magic about that box. So, following the ark signified following God. He says, sanctify yourselves in verse 5, or set apart, consecrate yourselves, get yourself ready for God's service. This is a very special day, and so he says, treat it that way. God is going to exalt Joshua. He tells the priests, Joshua tells the priests to take up the Ark of the Covenant, to pass over. God says to Joshua, verse 7, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. He says, I'm going to show this nation that I'm going to show them very clearly that you are the God-appointed ruler. Again, this has got to be very encouraging to Joshua, because maybe there were some out there who might have been tempted, or maybe they did kind of grumble under their breath a little bit. Well, he's not Moses. Moses did things differently. You sure do things different than Moses did. And God is saying, you know what? He's not Moses, but he's my appointed leader. And God tells Joshua, I'm going to show them that. And so you go on, and God is commanding Joshua, you'll command the priests that bear the Ark of the Covenant, when you come to the brink of Jordan, stand still in Jordan. And so Joshua tells them to come and hear the words of the Lord in verse 9. And he says, hereby, verse 10, you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. All these inhabitants of the land of Canaan, he's going to drive them out for you. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth before you into Jordan. And so he says, take 12 men out of one of each tribe, of course, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. I imagine this had to be right up there with seeing the Red Sea parted, as far as just, wow factor, because the river stops flowing. We can divert rivers. Humans can do that. It's no small feat, don't get me wrong, but you can divert rivers and go around or something. But to just see a river just go and stop, and water stands in a heap, it's not diverting around anywhere, it just stops. There's no explanation for that except it's a miracle. There are folks that try to explain away just about everything in the Bible that's miraculous. And they'll say things like, well, when Jesus died on the cross and it says it went dark, that was a solar eclipse. A lot of people were talking about that just this past August because of the solar eclipse we had, the total eclipse. There's several problems with that. One of the most glaring being it was dark for how long? It was dark for 3 hours. And if you do a little research, the longest it could even possibly be dark during a complete 100% solar eclipse, if you're in the main area, path of totality as they call it, is about, 2 or 3 minutes? It might be a little over 3 minutes, not hours. But there are people that will try to explain away everything just to try to get miracles, the miraculous, out of the Bible. Well, if you believe in the God of heaven, believing in the miraculous is nothing. Because if there is a God, and there is, then he is almighty, he is the creator. It would be nothing for him to do miracles. And there's no explanation for a river stopping. It just stops. And over here, here's the water coming down, flowing, and it just stops, and there's a big heap. And now you look and, okay, we can walk across. That had to be quite an amazing sight to see. And so, where do we leave off? Verse 14, the people were moving their tents. They that bear the ark were coming to Jordan. Verse 15, the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks at the time of harvest, or all the time of harvest. The waters which came down from above stood and rose upon an heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan. Those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. The priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. So God tells Joshua, I'm going to magnify you in the sight of the people. Joshua gives these instructions. It happens. And God says, I'm going to show I'm Lord of all the earth. A couple of things we notice about that. All the earth is amenable to the Lord. There's nobody that's not under his jurisdiction, we might say. But it's interesting because he says, I'm Lord of all the earth. The Jordan is part of the earth. He's going to show he's Lord of the Jordan too. And we've been looking at home in some of our family Bible study time that there's a book called Wisdom's Corner. A guy that I've known for a long time, and Reagan's family's known him for a long time. He's put out this little Wisdom's Corner. It's kind of intended more for children, but there's actually a lot of good material in there for adults. And I subscribed to it years ago, and he's finally put several of them, compiled about 365, I think, into a book. So kind of designed to be a daily devotional. And so we'll go through them with our children. But one of the neat things that he has in there is showing how the plagues on Egypt were a judgment against every single god of Egypt. They had all these gods. They worshiped the Nile. They worshiped the sun. They had all these different Osiris. They had all these different gods. Each plague was a judgment against one or more of their gods. And it's showing over and over again, God is the Lord of all the earth. He's over a God who's just, kind of a general God like Osiris. He's over the sun. He can make the sun go dark. He's over the Nile. He can make it turn to blood, and what you depended on for life now will kill you if you drink it. He's Lord of the Jordan River. He can make it just stop and stand in a heap. He is the God of all the earth. So, 14 through 17 of chapter 3, the waters are cut off. They stand in a heap till the Israelites pass over. Again, this will probably be sometime around April, looking at the time of harvest and the Jordan overflowing the bank. Adam is, this city, Adam, it mentions in verse 16, is around where the Jabbok meets the Jordan, somewhere, we're not really sure exactly where it is, maybe 20 miles or so north of Jericho. So it seems they're going to cross north of Jericho and come down to the city of Jericho. But they cross over the Jordan, then you get to chapter 4. This is I have it in my notes as crossing the Jordan part 2, because it's kind of continuing this account, and again, recalling that the chapter breaks are not in the original. It came to pass, when the people were clean or entirely passed over Jordan, God is going to talk to Joshua and tell these 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of man. We mentioned they started with this earlier before they crossed the Jordan. Take those people that you chose and tell them to take out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones. Carry them over with you. Leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. Then you call the 12 men, and he tells them to pass over before the ark into the midst of the Jordan. Take every man a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. This is going to be a sign, verse 6, that when your children ask, what mean you by these stones, you'll answer them, the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. So they did as Joshua commanded. They took up 12 stones out of the midst of Jordan, as the Lord spake unto Joshua according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and they laid down there. And then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, the place where the feet of the priests which bear the ark of the covenant stood. They are there unto this day. It seems, he tells each man take a stone across Jordan to serve as a memorial. These would be big stones, not just, a little small rock. He says carry it on your shoulders. So it would be something big. Sometimes we need reminders, don't we? And this is their reminder. Their children are going to say, what's the deal with those stones? This little, I don't know if I'd call it a statue, but this little organization of stones you got here. What's the deal with that? Well, they could tell their children that represents the day we crossed over the Jordan. God showed his mighty power. He stopped the Jordan. The water stood in the heat, and we crossed over. So that's their memorial. What's our memorial, by the way? The Lord's Supper. He's given us that to remind us. And when our children say, and those of us who are parents, there's always a time at which the children say, hey, what's the deal with the crackers and the grape juice? And they want to know. Just the same way, no doubt, Israelites one day would have said, Dad, what's the deal with these stones? I said, well, let me tell you about those stones, son. Let me tell you about the day that the God of heaven and earth stopped the Jordan cold, and it stood in a heap. And the children of Israel, they just crossed right over on dry land. And so we can say to our children today, well, let me tell you about that. That's not just any old crackers and grape juice. That reminds us of Jesus. And then we go on and we tell our children about the sacrifice of Jesus and how he gave his life for us. And so they're to teach their children. It's to remind them, but they're also to teach their children. He says, notice verse 9. They are there unto this day. This shows contemporary authorship. There's not much time passing between these events and the recording of these events. Where did I leave off? 10. Okay. So the priests which bear the ark, they stand in the midst of the Jordan until everything is finished that the Lord commanded. Everybody's passed over, in other words. So when they're all passed over, the ark of the Lord passed over last. And then the priests, of course, in the presence of the people. Reuben, Gad, half-tribe Manasseh, they passed over armed before the children of Israel. Remember, they promised to do that in Numbers 20. I keep saying 23. I think it may be 32. Because there's a verse in there where Moses talks about if you don't keep your word, be sure your sin will find you out. And I think the verse is verse 23, but I think it's chapter 32. Yes, it's chapter 32. So they had promised Moses they would do that, and they're keeping their word. 40,000 prepared for war passed over before the Lord unto battle to the plains of Jericho. There would seem, some people say, looking at the census from Numbers 1, that there would be a lot more of these people. Sometimes people say, well, there should have been a lot more than just 40,000. But it may be that some stayed behind to protect their wives and their children. Or this could be an initial contingent with more coming later. Maybe they're sending an initial contingent, and there's some other people staying behind for just a little bit to finish houses, to finish, building barns or whatever they might be building, or maybe again that they're staying to help look after the wives and children. But be that as it may, that's the number that is given there. Yes, ma'am. It's just entirely, just another way of saying entirely. It's like you go to the store, can I buy some of something? They said, man, we're clean out. It's just kind of an old expression. But yeah, it's just a reference to entirely. Verse 14, I'm trying to condense this so I get through the chapter. On that day, the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. So God says, I'm going to show that you're my chosen leader. And the people, they fear Joshua. They respect him. The people respect him all the days of his life. 17 through 19, he tells the priests come up out of Jordan. When they come up out of the midst of Jordan and their souls were lifted onto the dry land, the waters of Jordan returned to their place, flowed over all his banks as they did before. Again, I bet that, that's got to be a sight to see. As soon as their feet hit the land, just the water had to be loud. Quite a chilling sight, no doubt. So the waters returned. The people came up out of Jordan 10th day of the first month, and now they encamp in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So 10th day of the first month, they're about At this time, at this place, at this location, Gilgal, they're about a mile and a quarter from Jericho. So they're right there. Then you see 24. He tells the children of Israel, when your children ask what mean these stones, then you tell them, 24, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you might fear the Lord your God forever. God is all-powerful. By the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but it seems that there may very well be two memorials of rocks here. One memorial is in Jordan, and one is in Gilgal. That's the way it seems if you read this and put it all together. It may just be some repeating, but it seems for me when I read it, it just sounds like there are two different memorials. One of them's right there in Jordan, and it may be that these stones are so big that the water's just kind of passing over them, but it's not washing them downstream, and they stay there, but they're close enough to the surface that they can actually show them to their children and say, oh, this is a memorial. And then another in Gilgal. I'm not entirely sure. I've tried to work that out, and I can't tell if it's talking about just one or two, but it seems to me there are two. Lord willing, we'll pick up next week with chapter 5 and talk about Joshua encountering the captain of the Lord's host, receiving instructions about taking Jericho, and we'll look at the conquest of Jericho and getting into their conquest of the land of Canaan proper. After just a few more chapters, what we'll do is we'll condense a whole lot because there's a lot of stuff that you can cover in a pretty quick amount of time. So these first few chapters, we move a little slower, then we'll jump through and kind of get to the end of the book and then go from there into the book of Judges. But chapter 5, next Sunday morning, Lord willing. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention. We're going to have a brief break before our worship time starts.